hits you, what are your rights? What can you do? What insurance coverage applies? What are your remedies? So this is actually a very complicated area of law. And today I wanted to break this down, talk about the current law, and also some proposals to change that law that are currently pending in the state of Tennessee. So this is about Tennessee law. To be clear, I'm licensed in Tennessee as an attorney. We handle these cases. I wanted to break down the complexity around this because it's not straightforward. And I'm going to show you this image real quick about the different insurance coverages that are out there and how they make a big difference. So give me 1 second and I will put this up for you. So there are basically 4 periods of coverage, right? And what matters for purposes of the law and the insurance coverage is what the driver is doing. Okay, so if we look at this period 1, that is when the driver has the app off and they are not doing anything related to their work as an Uber driver, as a delivery driver, or whatever. So in that period, their personal coverage will apply. And that is whatever it is. And also, critically, if they are uninsured during this period, if they are driving without insurance and violating the law, then an Uber or DoorDash or whatever is not going to cover them. They're just on their own, okay? Period 2 is when they have the app on and they are waiting for a request. So if we can switch over here to a different screen, bear with me while I figure that out. That is going to be under a different law, under different limits. So give me 1 second to switch that over. That is this one. Okay, so this is our transportation law that covers this, and it's TCA 5512-141. And what that says is during this delivery or network available period, we have different limits that apply. Let me just get to that. Okay, let's log into this part right here. So when they're not engaged in a prearranged ride, then they have primary auto insurance of $50,000 or $100,000 per accident. So $50,000 per person, essentially, or $100,000 for a combined incident. That is double the minimum limits of Tennessee, which is normally $25,000 is per person is what you must carry as a minimum limit, or $50,000 per incident. So in this period 2, to go back to that, in period 2, when they are waiting, they're on the app, they're waiting for a request, they have basically limited liability. But crucially, what is important here is that there is coverage. See, now what had been happening is that when you sign up to be a delivery driver, your own insurance probably has an exclusion for if you work as a delivery driver or a transportation network driver, as an Uber driver, either delivering goods or people. Same exclusion. Your own insurance is likely to exclude that. So there's a gap that is created if the driver is not necessarily got a passenger in the car, they may not be covered. So this was designed to fill that gap. So you have these lower limits in what we're calling period 2, where the app is on and you're waiting for the request for a driver or a passenger, or we'll get into delivery, or an order, for example, to pick up a DoorDash order. So that's period 2. Okay, let's go into period 3 and 4, which are basically kind of the same, which is you've got the accepted request. So now the driver has accepted the DoorDash order or has accepted the Uber passenger. And we'll talk about how these are different categories, delivery versus transportation, but these periods are basically the same. Okay, so you've accepted the request. You don't yet have the goods. Don't have the person in the car. You don't have the delivery order. So in that period, the higher coverage is going to apply. Now we're going to talk separately about delivery orders, as I've mentioned, but for purposes of passengers, right, rideshare stuff, let's go back to that law, which is here. So now we have higher limits, and sorry, I'm going to scroll just right to it. We'll do a Command F for the 1 million. Okay, so while they are engaged, okay, you've got the primary liability of 1 million. Now that's interesting because it's not separated out, right, in terms of per person per occurrence. It's $1 million of coverage. So in theory, if someone is hurt to the tune of $1 million, you could get the full $1 million from them. You see how complicated this is, right? I mean, they do not make this easy, and it has a lot to do with the fact that, you know, there's a lot going on here, right? For the one thing, any bill like this has a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You've got the insurance lobby, you've got the rideshare lobby, you've got trial lawyers trying to do the best we can to get the most coverage possible. And you also have an interesting angle, which is that Uber or Lyft, they kind of want some regulations because they don't want someone to come outflank them and start a rival company. So if you have to have certain expenditures to do a rideshare business, they're actually okay with that. I know it's counterintuitive a little bit in terms of you would think that companies just want no regulation whatsoever, but in a way, it's a way to use the regulatory system to protect themselves. So all of this complexity that's why it's so complex. We'll talk about period 4 here in just a second. Basically the same thing, which is when you are in the rideshare. Okay, let's find that window again. So back to period 4. You know, you're the passenger in the vehicle. That's full rideshare coverage. That's the $1 million. Okay. So you can understand that the big fight in these cases might be, where is the driver in this system? Where are they in terms of have they accepted the order? Are they logged on? And you might have a big fight about what we call discovery, which is when you are trying to gather information about the case. And Uber might say, well, you know, the driver hadn't yet accepted the request, for example. We're in period 2, not 3. And the difference could be $900,000 or $950,000 of coverage. So that's where a lawyer, if you're in one of these incidents, one of the things we have to do is really suss out, you know, which coverage applies and how you can get a recovery. If you're interested generally in what you can recover in car accident cases, I have other videos on this channel. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, go to our YouTube channel. But you know, that's a different question. But the point is simply that, where can you get the recovery? Like, what is the insurance that is available? So I mentioned that there is a proposal to, for the first time, actually regulate the delivery network drivers separately, differently from the rideshare networks. Okay, and I'm going to show you that now. This is a proposed bill. It is by Representative Travis, I believe, in the House. And it's largely like the Uber bill, okay, but it is different and a little bit more broad, because when we talk about this, let's zone in on this for just a second. A delivery network company. Now, this is really meant to regulate Uber Eats and Doordash, but it's broad, and it's broad enough that it could regulate Amazon, FedEx, potentially much bigger carriers, Kroger, for example. If you, we'll get into this, but essentially it's, if you order through an app, sort of like an on-demand order, here we go. an individual who uses a digital network to connect with a DNC driver to obtain delivery services for the individual. Um, so I said it could regulate Amazon. Well, Amazon has certain programs. I think Flex is one of them. That's like a grocery delivery service. That's more. It's not like ordering something off Amazon, to just buy a product. It's more like Uber Eats, but for Whole Foods or whatever. So that area of Amazon's business could very well fall under this regulation. The same thing, perhaps, with grocery stores. It's probably not going to affect Kroger directly, but in certain, the way that they package their delivery products, it's possible that it could. So we have a very similar here, subsection D. We have this same thing about an availability period where they're not currently active delivering your lunch or dinner or whatever it is, and we've got the same sort of limits, 50 or 100,000. I do need to scroll up here and make a point. This is an amendment that was filed yesterday, which is March 2nd. Well, it's dated March 2nd, but I think it was actually filed March 3rd. So this has not been voted on. This is not the law. This is a proposed law, okay? And whether it passes, I don't know. But the point I would make is that currently, this is not the law, but it's likely that it could become the law. And I'm just discussing that as a proposal. But who knows whether it will pass? However, seems likely to pass, just my own guess, because it's an area that there is a current gap in the law, which actually, let me back up and explain. Okay, so the current gap in the law is if you're driving for Uber Eats and you have what I mentioned earlier, is that there's likely an exclusion on your policy. There's likely an exclusion that says, if you go do this commercial delivery app thing, your car insurance doesn't apply. So when they're doing it, if they get in a car accident, on the way to go pick up the order, what coverage applies? They're almost effectively uninsured in that gap. So that is the spirit of what this proposed bill that I was just linking or showing you is supposed to do. So again, not the law yet, but probably going to be law or some version of it, because there is this need to fix this gap. And the proposal is essentially very similar to the rideshare version of the bill. The limits, let me do a Command F here. They have, as again, this is an amendment, but it might not become the law. But the current proposal is that during the delivery service period, the limits would go up to 300. Now that's not a million. And what's interesting about that is, Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, they have to have $1 million because of the other law that I've been talking about. And they have apparently made the effort that we shouldn't have to pay 1 million when the Uber Eats driver causes an accident, because they're not transporting people, they're transporting, a pizza. Now that has a superficial appeal. I understand that argument, but if the DoorDash driver runs a red light and hits a pedestrian in a crosswalk, why should it not be covered to the tune of the $1 million coverage that they already have, that DoorDash or whatever already has, simply because the thing in the back seat is food rather than a person? So it's kind of nonsensical to me, but okay, it's a compromise, I guess. So that is the proposal. So that's basically everything I wanted to talk about in terms of these proposals and what these laws are. I hope you understand that it's complicated. If you're injured in an Uber accident or a DoorDash accident, hurt by a DoorDash driver, an Uber driver, give us a call, because there's a lot to unpack in terms of where were you in the process, what coverage applies. I haven't even talked about your own underinsured motorist coverage and whether that applies. For example, if it turns out that you're in one of those lower tiers of coverage because you're in period 1 or 2 that we talked about, where the coverage is only $50,000, or for whatever reason, DoorDash, Uber argues that the driver was not on the system and therefore it's not their problem at all. And it turns out that that driver has an exclusion. Now you've got no coverage. There's a lot to work through in terms of issues related to these cases. And it's a regulatory mess because there's so many interested parties. I mean, there's just so many, and we're talking about some of the biggest companies in the world. Certainly, Amazon, is involved in helping the drafting of bills like this. So I hope it's been helpful for you guys to watch this. I haven't had a chance to look if there's any comments. I'll respond to those after the fact. But thanks so much for watching.